we should be good to go.
Oh, great. Let's see. I have the YouTube page up, and with a little bit of there's a little bit of latency, so it's starting right now. Also, we're live.
Woohoo.
Nice. And it looks like we got about 3 people in the YouTube streaming session. So hello, anyone that's watching from YouTube, and welcome. Maybe give it 1 more minute just in case someone's running a little late, and we'll get it going here. One more chance to grab a drink of water for me.
Our weather's been warmer, so I've opened windows and gone outside more, and now I feel like I'm sneezing all the time. There's something out there that got stirred up.
Oh yeah, allergy season is coming. I'm always like springtime, and then I'm like, oh, sneeze time.
Yes, keep the tissues around.
Okay, I'm ready. Yeah, let's go ahead and launch our event here. Welcome to another review of the book The Body Keeps the Score, Chapter 4 in this case. And I always like to start out the event to just say thanks. Thanks for setting aside some time, not only to read the book, but also to come in, hang out, and discuss it together. Pretty exciting thing to do, and I'm just so happy we get to do it together. So thanks again for your time and energy in helping co-create the event. A couple of norms we like to go through. Make sure that the event is safe and comfortable for everybody that attends. Since we're talking about some topics of psychology and at times counseling and things, just a reminder that we're not a therapy group. We're not a replacement for professional therapy. Please avoid any attempts to fix or advise. Somebody might share some things. It can be a very empathic tendency to try to advise ways to fix something that somebody might say. But in this event, let's just give it space. Let's just give it some room for people to share and feel heard. And that way nobody feels judged or pressured to take a certain course. I and you statement hygiene is recommended. It's always a little bit softer to say something like, I think what I heard you say, instead of you said. That feels a little bit more direct. And confidentiality, just a reminder, we do stream. We're not here to say, did you hear what so-and-so said on Thursday night in VR? Nothing like that is the purpose of this event. But we are streaming, so if you do share something, just be mindful that we do have audience members in YouTube and on Discord as well. We have the raise hand feature, so if you click the squirrel box that you see up to your left, it'll put your name on the board for a hand raise, and that'll be a signal to me to know that I can leave a pause for someone to speak. And if it wasn't obvious, there's a little X button under the squirrel, and if you can zero in on that X, you can actually delete your hand raise if you changed your mind. But pretty casual as far as hand raises go. We're a good group, so if there's a pause, don't feel like it's mandatory. It's just a way to kind of break into a conversation, especially if there's a little bit of a tennis match going on. If you are open to feedback and advice, just say so. hey, I'm facing this thing and I'm curious if anybody has any thoughts, be happy to offer some opinions. And there's also open discussion on the Bridgemakers Discord. So as you see to the right, the Bridgemakers group Discord is there on the streaming video, and we are there, all week. Check in a couple of times a week there to see if anybody's posted anything. So if you have anything during the week you want to bring up, there's a platform for that. And let's dive into Chapter 4. I kind of consider Chapter 4 almost like a lightning round of all of the topics that Dr. Bessel van der Kolk is presenting. There's a lot of things that he goes over in maybe like one paragraph or just a little section that are actually entire chapters later in the book. So we're diving into kind of a really comprehensive look of all of the lessons learned in The Body Keeps the Score. So pretty excited to kind of cover this part of the book here. And the first section of the chapter, we start out, Dr. Bessel van der Kolk has this, this theory that you can kind of get stuck in a survival mode. Trauma isn't essentially the event that happened. It's kind of the after effects and the echoes of it emotionally and how it affects our body as those memories kind of come back over and over again and signal your body to go through a stress response. And as we go through more in the chapter here, it sort of crashes your internal flow where you're constantly getting hit with this interruption in not only thoughts, but your body is reacting to that memory. And if you're going through that several times a day, it really throws your body kind of off balance. And it's kind of like almost the watches that were recovered from the Hiroshima bomb explosion. Is the bomb detonated at 8:15 a.m. and there's a lot of museum pieces that you can see that have various archivals of the items retrieved from Hiroshima, and you'll see that the clock is stopped at 8:15. In addition to all the other heat-related trauma that the watch itself went through, and it's kind of representative of a human trauma as well. You go through something that was very difficult, if that memory sticks with us and keeps coming back, it's like you get stuck in that moment. And Dr. Bessel van der Kolk, he really emphasized this idea that your nervous system is constantly redirecting energy to suppress the inner chaos. So, as just a crude example, you're attacked by a bear and then months, even years later, you're, just sitting in a meeting at work and suddenly you remember that bear attack. Well, your body responds, as if that bear attack was just about to happen again, and you get this kind of disruption in your, just general day and your energy levels. So you're constantly getting this little bump, and it ultimately sort of throws everything in your body out of whack because, we're not designed to be stressed every, every 30 minutes or every 90 minutes. And studies, he mentioned this really briefly in the chapter, and I think he goes into it more later in the book, is that studies are now linking trauma to different kinds of diseases, especially autoimmune diseases. So if you think of something like fibromyalgia, that, doctors always say happens because of mysterious causes. Chronic fatigue, this is another one, feeling tired all the time. So yeah, we're going to get, more into that throughout this book. And there's also links to, we talked about the ACEs study, Adverse Childhood Experiences. There is vast amounts of research data linking high ACE scores to various diseases as well. So this has been one of my personal motivations to heal is to try to, see if I could get lucky and maybe have preventative care for myself, like around the susceptibility to these different kinds of, chronic pains and fatigues that are associated with some of these trauma studies. And I loved how Dr. van der Kolk put the section of the chapter where he talks about being designed to survive. We live in a modern age, and we order pizza and we sit in front of Netflix. But our design is really to live in a hut and to hunt and gather, and we're designed to survive that scenario where sometimes you can't afford this big clunky computer side of our brain that takes a lot of energy to operate. Sometimes you're walking across the bridge and there's a loose stone and you need, your kind of, older animal brain to just react and get, off that stone before you trip and fall over the bridge. So as a priority, our body reacts to survival situations. And when that happens, it redirects your body's resources because, just like any electronic device, if something's operating, it's taking energy away from something else that's connected to that electronic system. You have to redirect resources because they're not infinite. So when the body experiences a survival mode situation, it shuts down unessential parts of your system and redirects all your energy to what's called the limbic system. So, here we are comfortably daydreaming, in our frontal cortex, doing some problem solving or thinking about what we're going to do later in the day. We stub our toe and our body totally redirects all of our presence and energy into our limbic system, which is our more kind of de-evolved animal brain that's very emotional and reactionary. So it's like flicking a light switch, so to speak. And, what happens is if you have had some past trauma that is still being recovered from, or you have a chronic like childhood PTSD state, your limbic system, the odds of your limbic system like totally taking over a situation are much higher than somebody that has like a baseline nervous system. So a small stress response at like the grocery store, maybe you can't pull your credit card out of the card reader. That to somebody that has a baseline nervous system and hasn't had a stressful day might just be like, oh, can you help me? My card is stuck. But to somebody with PTSD, that might be in the higher pressure situation category that sort of triggers a trauma response. Now you're yanking on the card or you're swearing at it, causing a scene. And, it's just because now that person has like retreated into their very reactionary emotional brain and their thought process is compromised. And that's kind of the mechanics of a trauma response. Can happen to anybody, but if you have a PTSD condition, it's a much lower threshold. I like to think of PTSD and stress and trauma as kind of a threshold situation. Things that might normally not impact somebody, you have a much lower threshold to that if you've had a traumatic experience and can easily more or less go into this kind of limbic system stuckness that Dr. van der Kolk talks about. So here's kind of like another way to look at it is the chronic stuckness. So not just a single situation, but kind of almost being in the survival state on a consistent basis is that, after a shocking situation, there's almost no better way to recover than social support, right? Like if you think back to our childhoods, if we bumped our elbow and had a little bit of a cry, maybe mom or dad would come over and be like, oh, tell me what happened, show me your boo-boo. and you get sort of back to your comfortable state because mom and dad are there to keep you safe. It's really not as big of a deal because they're not overreacting. So you have a model of how to react to the situation now, and it really calms a very young nervous system down that was previously in pain. But if you don't have things like that and you go through consistent traumatizing experiences and you don't really have this like social network or some other way of recovering and kind of exiting out of that survival state, that's where I was talking a little bit about it lowering your threshold. And what can happen is now you have this spike in stress where a normal person might recover and come back under that stress response. Their body recovers. For a compromised nervous system that has a PTSD condition, you might not come back under your stress response, and you might just stay in a stress response, and it becomes so normal to your day-to-day operations that you sort of forget that it's abnormal to feel that way, and you can get tired and agitated. And it's kind of a mystery, why am I feeling this way? Because, again, your body's redirecting all your resources to our older animal brain, which makes it even more difficult to figure out. So it's a very threshold-based kind of stuckness that is the insidiousness of recovering from PTSD. And I like to mention the movie Captain Phillips. Not like a super movie I recommend, like you have to see, but there's a scene at the end of it that I really love because it's this example of somebody being through one of the most extremely horrendous situations like a person could go through. And, it's obviously something that they're going to spend years recovering from. And the scene in the movie is like the moment that they rescue him. And Tom Hanks does this wonderful job of somebody like coming out of a survival mode, and this medical professional is kind of doing his vitals, but while she's checking his vitals, she's also really engaging like with him to sort of keep bringing him out of this survival state. And it's just one of the most wonderfully like little constructed scenes of humanity, and what it's like to be in the middle of such a high pressure situation, but with a helper. And that's the part I love about the scene, is this wonderful person is just bringing him out of that state. And I found this really interesting. Dr. Vanderkolk listed the sort of the foundational, like fundamental aspects of what your brain does. Broke it down into this kind of list of things it does for us. And at the very baseline, we have the signals of what we need, like food, sleep, are we cold? Those sensations that we get information about what we should act upon to protect our body and be more comfortable. And then the next level is we create a map of our world. One of those points on the map is probably the grocery store, a friend's house. We keep track of where these things are so that when we get these signals, we also have a direction we can go to find it. Our body, also generates energy to get us there. Converts that those carbs and proteins into glucose that push our muscles and work our thought process, and then warn us of danger. So this is the part here that gets kind of short-circuited if we have a traumatic experience, and we can get into that stuckness portion. So if that warn of danger is got a big exclamation point next to it, and it's just constantly saying, me, 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 I'm the one that needs attention, it sort of throws this whole brain-body process out of whack. And then above that is the make decisions part. So if you constantly have a body that's trying to warn you of some impending danger, And all those dangers are just memories, things that have happened in the past. We never really fully get to that decision-making process that's so important to navigating life. And this is such another fundamental part of the book that really shaped my new understanding of trauma, which is that we sort of have these different evolutionary points in how our brains developed. So, if we go way, way, way back, to those eras with all those Latin names, like the Cretaceous period, a lot of animals, just basically had a brain stem, just that's the kind of size of the brain. And, most of the functions there are just like your basic body functions. So controls like your heartbeat and, sensory input, like what are your eyes seeing, what's your nose smelling, and also basic reactions, fight or flight, and then control your hormones as well, releasing the hormones that make you hungry. And then over time, this is called the mammal brain. So if you think of animals that nurture their young and tend to be in groups, have social networks, that's this limbic system, which is the home of the amygdala that we've talked about a few times. So in addition to the brainstem, there's a higher evolved brain above that called the limbic system. And that gave animals these emotions, memory, and a more sophisticated kind of smoke alarm for danger, for better survival. And then now, if we fast forward to just the last 10 or 50,000 years of human history, we really started growing this much larger brain mass, which is the cerebral cortex. And inside of the cerebral cortex, we have, we developed really complex thought. So we started much better problem solving. We got language skills, so we could have ultimately VR events just like this one. But even more important maybe is the abstract thinking. This is where imagination comes from, the ability to invent and be creative. So these are three steps in the ladder of our evolution. But what's interesting is each one of those parts of the brain still exists, and they sort of link together, but they kind of function a little bit separate from one another. It's almost like when you install a program on a PC, the program's on the PC, but the PC has its own processes as well. The program just operates on top of it. So these three parts of our brain are linked, but they don't really necessarily operate as one. So when something, for example, fires in the amygdala, like we talked about in the limbic system, that takes resources away from the cerebral cortex, which is our problem-solving side of our brain. So that's really the point that Dr. van der Kolk, I think, likes to drive home in these chapters, is that when you have a trauma response and your amygdala sort of grabs the steering wheel and is now in control, it's consuming the resources that would otherwise be going to your reasoning centers, where you might say, oh, actually, this isn't a big deal after all. If your amygdala's got the steering wheel, you might not really have the luxury of making that decision because you're already reacting to whatever you're facing. And I see a couple of chat messages. Let me just take a moment to see what's in the YouTube chat here. Oh, yeah, we got Aaron, Fuzz, hello. And Carl, yeah, just saying hello, love this chapter and all the biology. Yeah, absolutely. Things we take for granted these days haven't been known as long as it seems. Yeah, this is all, interestingly enough, just in the last 40, 50 years, believe it or not. Carl says, I sometimes get with all of the claims made that are observational and not so much experimental or evident. Oh, yeah, I mean, always trust what you can see, right? Yeah, thanks for those comments, Fuzz and Carl. And yeah, this is something Dr. Vanderkolk mentioned very briefly in the preamble, which was he's very big into developmental neurophysiology and how these kind of adverse experiences can shape our brains at much younger ages. And when a child is born, one of the most rapid areas of growth is actually this limbic system that we keep talking about. So while you're growing up in your infancy stages, that's when your limbic systems are developing. And there's this saying among neuroscientists that neurons that fire together wire together. And essentially what that means is the brain is very use dependent, which means the more you focus on one thing, one experience, one emotion, the more your brain kind of gets wired for that emotion. So the things that are being studied is that if a child is chronically maybe verbally talked to in a judgmental manner, or maybe they're just emotionally neglected by their caretakers. If that's a chronic situation, does that then sort of wire your brain as an expectation, that I have to take care of myself because there's no one else really to take care of me? And then your brain goes on this whole developmental journey of like being very inward focused. These are obviously wide speculations on my non-scientist mind, but that was what I was gathering from the chapter, is that if you take into account a child's experience, you can also sort of correlate that to their development and make some assumptions and maybe how their thought process, in terms of the limbic system, had developed. And I think this also kind of starts going towards answering that question we had earlier in the events, which was how can two people experience the same thing but like have completely different experiences, completely different reactions. Some people might quickly move on and not really have a lot of troubling memories, while someone else could be the opposite. In this developmental neurophysiology studies, these could start unlocking, the reasons that happens is if from birth you have a compromised, limbic system that's a little overactive, that would give you a propensity to sort of not be able to let go of these situations as you collect them through life. And I loved this part of the chapter where he talked about the cerebral cortex really sort of coming online at around the age of 7 years old. That's when it develops to the point, where they really, a 7-year-old really starts, communicating much more clearly, being able to reason in more complex manners, make better decisions. A lot of identity starts developing. But also empathy. This is when they start saying, oh, there are actually consequences to things I do. I know a few kids that are older than that don't seem to have the empathy yet, but I know it's coming. So hopefully they'll get there. And he described the amygdala as being the body's smoke detector. Like one of the main components of this limbic system that we keep pointing out is the amygdala, about the shape of like an almond, like about the size and shape of an almond. And it's right there in the very kind of middle evolved brain. So, we have the brain stem, then we have the amygdala, and then we got our cerebral cortex like up over that. And with the amygdala's position, if you think about it, like all of your nervous system is connected through your brainstem. So if you touch a hot stove, for example, your amygdala, just by the nature of its location in the body, like knows that you've touched that hot stove first. Like that information is acted upon before your cerebral cortex even has awareness that this is occurring. And what Dr. van der Kolk calls that is bottom-up decision-making, where the signal comes from your body, it's processed by your amygdala first. Your amygdala decides that is danger, I need to react. It ramps up all your emotions and stress hormones, and this all occurs before your cerebral cortex is even engaged in the process. So what you have in contrast to that is this top-down decision-making, where once this information reaches your cerebral cortex and you have some time to process it, now you can sort of override your amygdala and say, oh, actually, like, this is probably a better, more productive course for, like, what we're experiencing right now. So if you think of this in terms of day-to-day, if you're walking across the room and, maybe a little insect kind of darts out from underneath the floorboard and runs by you, you might jump, right? This insect is only a couple of millimeters in size, but here's this 200-pound fully functioning adult, like, screaming that there was a little bug. That was your amygdala. Your amygdala made that decision and decided that's what we were going to do. But what makes a baseline nervous system different from PTSD is how much your cerebral cortex gets a say now. So, now that the nanoseconds have occurred where your amygdala got to do something, your cerebral cortex then says, oh, it's going that way, and I'm not going to worry about it. Maybe you just keep walking on by, even though there was a little bug that ran across the floor. Maybe you make just a much more reasonable and informed decision, or you go get a little cup, and you catch them and you put them in the basement or something. That's not an amygdala thing to do. An amygdala is like react, smash, run. So this is the difference between like bottom-up reaction and top-down decision-making. And he described this process as well of like a watchtower, which is the amygdala is really kind of black and white, like danger, not danger. Very emotional, very reactionary. So if you're in a situation where you see or smell smoke, the amygdala is like everything's burning, run. Now, if we think of the concept of a watchtower where our reasoning center and our cerebral cortex can be viewed as like this watchtower where we get, a much more high-level view of what's going on, we can then make decisions. We can kind of mindfully, evaluate the situation and say, is the house in fact burning? Or maybe, little Stan Jr. just made some popcorn and it made some smoke that set off the smoke detector. So this kind of higher level reasoning, being like a little bit after our initial reaction that comes from our amygdala, is kind of one of the core components of mindfulness, is that if you're able to create that pause between your reaction and actually taking a situation in, that's where I think you can really get on an accelerated path to recovery, because you can't avoid the memories, they come. It's just when they come, do you let your amygdala drive the bus, or do you just wait a second and say like, oh, this is something I've been working on, and here's this technique that I'm practicing to try to, get through this memory in a little bit more productive and comfortable way. So he paints this really vivid story of a car accident in chapter 4, a couple that went through not only like a car accident, but it was like a highway pileup where like I think there were like 60 or 70 cars that actually were smashing into one another on the highway. And, part of the study was they were able to do the brain scans. And in this case, it was the fMRI brain scan, which has like a next level like resolution of what we saw in the PET scans. And, what he kind of emphasized in this section of the chapter too is that, the traumatic event itself is very acute. It has a beginning and it has an end. It occurred in a finite time span. So what trauma is, it's not really the event that happened. The event was just an occurrence. What trauma is the after effects, these flashbacks that come in the form of memory. And what makes the flashbacks so kind of, fundamental to the process is that the flashback itself that Dr. van der Kolk has shown through these brain scans, just the memory of the event, triggers all of these body stress responses again. So it's not logical, right? We were bit by that dog, 25 years ago. But now every time I see a dog, I just get that little bit of a sense from my amygdala, like, hey, dog over there. That's how these kind of flashbacks occur. And, that's a much more minor example. You can think of the horrifying experiences that can be part of the human condition and then, amplify that small, there's a dog over there, times 100. And that's what some people are facing. And these flashbacks, they come back at unexpected times. They don't have a timer. Alexa, set my trauma response, for 6 p.m. every night while I'm eating, so I can just down it with a burrito. They come just whenever they come, and one of the things that I'm kind of practicing and keying in on in my recovery is just the practice of like when they come, allowing that information to get to that, big, thick cerebral cortex reasoning center up there, let it get through the amygdala and then be like, oh, hey, amygdala, this is something I got. Like, let me take this time. And then, I'm still remembering the hurt of that situation. I still remember the situation vividly. But now I'm like, I don't really need to react to this, though. It's something I've processed. I've thought my way through it. And I'm able to more and more choose, it's all right. Let's just move on with our day. And that's kind of the magic, I think, of the healing path and what makes it really worth it. But the physical side, leading up to that, when you're just in the grip of trauma, the constant presence of these unseen dangers in your body just constantly firing off these stress responses, it leads to fatigue, depression, weariness, and as we were talking about earlier, possibly even connections to physical illnesses. So it's a really great thing that you can do to set the intention and the commitment to healing. And it's a many years process. It was not, a couple of weeks or a couple of months at a retreat for me. This has been decades in the work, and I'd still put all the effort into it all over again because it's just a gift that continually, pays dividends. And this was such, Dr. van der Kolk has such an efficient way of writing. He makes these like 1 or 2 sentence statements, and you're like, man, that should be a whole book, like what you just said. And that's what I love about reading his book is you come across these like really profound, very efficient ways of looking things. So let me kind of read this. So the real challenge is not necessarily acceptance of what happened. And like, let's think about that for a second. Like one of the most decorated trauma scientists of our generation said, you don't have to accept what happened. It's not necessary. You never have to say like, I accepted, it was okay. I'm just going to get over it. It's not really about that. What he's saying is gaining the mastery over one's internal sensations and your own emotions. That's the secret of recovery, is understanding this process of how trauma like short circuits the brain, and not only short circuits it, but tricks your whole body into continually doing it over and over and over again. And he's saying the trick to this is gaining the mastery of how to self-interrupt that interruption. You're interrupting the interrupt. And, that's such a delicious, like, little commentary on what trauma is, through somebody that studied it for this long. So I found a nice little picture of a kung fu master standing on a yin-yang symbol there to sort of represent this journey of being able to grab that information from the amygdala. It's almost like having this really little overreactive like chihuahua that's yapping at everything, and you just have to be like, hey, we got this, calm down. It's just just dropping a package off. That's the secret. And, this was one of the most, I want to say there's probably 4 like really key like Mount Rushmores of takeaways of this book that really hit me. And this one was one of them, which is that the trauma experience of being inside your amygdala, of being that reactionary, emotional, survival-based animal that we all have in us, it abstracts time. So you lose the ability to understand like the passage of time, which is another like kind of sinister part of trauma, is that when we regress into this traumatic memory and we engage our stress response and our amygdala has grabbed the steering wheel, so to speak, we also lose the ability to just be like a linear being. And now we literally can be back in that exact moment because the amygdala doesn't understand the passage of time. Everything it's ever experienced and ever will experience and is experiencing, all of that is just jumbled up into one kind of like 4th dimensional soup that the amygdala lives in. The amygdala really is just danger, not danger. It doesn't know, the hours and the minute hands of the clock. So this was really amazing to me to think. We think about sometimes like boredom makes time go slower. When things happen, they happen so fast. We have these kind of little colloquialisms about experiencing time at different rates. And there's really a truth to it. And it is especially a key component of a traumatic, experience, a PTSD kind of a state, where we lose track during our PTSD, traumatic flashbacks. We lose track of the concept of time itself.
No. Good girl. All done.
And with that, let's wrap up with an inspiration. Every time I see a strong person, I wonder what darkness did they conquer? And with that, let's go ahead and open things up for any commentary that might have came from Chapter 4. Accepting any and all hand raises. I'll check the YouTube here for any comments. I see Fuzz typed the amygdala, the IT commander Worf of my mind. Yeah, absolutely. It's, I'll be comfortable to admit that I've probably lived a great portion of my life not having any understanding that there were 2 parts of my brain having a tug of war. And it was when I read this book that I started getting an idea of that process. And, just so many more components to it. But just the simple understanding and the aha moment, that eureka moment of these chapters of this book, were leaps forward in my own understanding of what was happening. And Jimmy, I got your hand raised there. I'm looking forward to your comment.
So I got really engrossed into this chapter. One thing that I found was amazing. It seemed that the more you experience reliving the trauma, the more enforced that trauma becomes. So people who suffer the trauma over and over of reliving that that event that kind of created the trauma, it just seems like it becomes this downward spiral unless you really take action to reframe it, to realize what is going on. And I think that has been such a key in kind of helping me overcome some of the trauma in my life, is like, hey, wait, stop, don't go down this path. Let's think about this for a moment. It's not all that we first interpreted it to be. And it also made me realize that when different people can take the same situation and have different perspectives, it really can create a trauma that maybe one or the other doesn't understand. So we should always be a little trepidatious about what we're trying to put out into the world. We should always try to experience our words through another's eyes. And I thought that this chapter was so good. I especially loved the top down and the bottom up views on what's going on. I thought that was amazing. The car wreck thing was amazing. The wife, I forgot her name. Was it Uta?
Yeah.
Just her.
That's right.
Yeah, her experience with what happened about her freezing was just. It was honestly quite terrifying to think that you could become frozen by your own trauma. How just something bad in your past can just carry so far into your future that even though it may no longer be a thing, it insists on being a thing because you made it a thing. And it's not that. Oh gosh, sorry, hang on. My mouth is going faster than my words. I don't want to say it's not that you made it to be that way, but you absolutely made it to be that way. And I don't know. It was a wonderful, wonderful chapter. It hit pretty hard. It really did hit pretty hard, and it opened my eyes to quite a bit. I know I had my brain is telling me I had other points to make about this, but I'm going to just let that fly for now. If it comes to me, I'll re-enter the board. Thank you, Scott.
Yeah, I would appreciate that because you're on a roll. Uche's response, being that really severe, like shutdown level of depression, I think the shutdown response sort of got a bit of a back seat to the PTSD discussion throughout history because it's so convenient and fun to say fight or flight. just rolls off the tongue. You know, fight, flight, freeze. There, I'm already tripping over it. Fight or flight just comes right out, but fight, flight, freeze. You know, and now there's fight, flight, freeze, fawn. So it's more complicated, but no less like important. Is freezing can come from traumatic flashbacks, because freezing is a legitimate survival strategy. There's a YouTube video of I think it's a gazelle that's being attacked by like a lion or a cheetah. It's one of those kind of African safari kind of videos, and the gazelle survives the experience because it just plays dead. Like the cheetah or the lion just gets bored or confused and just kind of goes on and focuses on something else, and the gazelle gets up and lives to see another day. And it's not socially the most celebrated response to adversity, but it's also a legitimate response, and it can often lead to a lot of unfair shaming and judgment for somebody to retreat, in their life, have days where they can't get out of bed. But man, oh man, the science backs what's happening to them, that it's a legitimate human response. They're recovering. And one of your earlier comments too, I really loved, which is like your body sort of is what they talked about in the book. It's very use based, right? Like whatever you use is kind of what your body like becomes good at and shapes itself around. If you're working at an assembly line and you're picking up heavy objects, like a job I had in the past, I got like built. Like I was ripped when I worked on this assembly line, because your body's like a use-based, experience. It sort of builds upon what you do, and the brain is no different. So if you think about, maybe a kid's going to school and it's, years in the past, because of course this doesn't happen anymore, right? Wink, wink. Where you go to school and you're singled out by classmates, and the teacher, for whatever reason doesn't intervene. Maybe they don't understand or see what's happening. But, if you're 5, 6, 7 years old and you're experiencing this on a daily basis, your brain is being developed that's my truth in the world. Your neurons are fusing around that as being your reality. So you take that development into, adult life, and now, maybe I'm the one flying off the handle at the meeting when all the action items are assigned to me, because that 7-year-old, brain is thinking, here we go again with all of this unfairness, and now I'm overreacting to a situation, which another person might have just taken in stride. And, this is where you get kind of some of that social shaming. Hey, you're overreacting. Well, if you rewind 40 years, let me explain to you why I'm overreacting in this situation. So I love that you brought up those beautiful points, especially that your brain is just like going to a gym. What you think is like your brain's workout and what it builds.
Yeah, and it almost kind of goes back to that whole thing I brought up last week about free will versus just acting on a programmed response based on your experience. But that, again, that's a whole big can of worms that we just can't open in the time we have.
Yeah, and I think I remember you mentioning a couple of events ago that, this little bit of a deeper understanding of our wiring was making you reconsider free will even. Is some of that still occurring? Yeah.
Usually when my friends and I take upon the debate of free will, I have taken upon the the side of arguing against free will just because no one seems to take that point. But I've taken that side so often now that I kind of become a proponent of against free will.
I love it because they're both equal sides of the argument. Either can be true. But yeah, sorry, I went on a little bit of a soapbox there, and I see KT's on the board too. I'd love to get your comment. And I'll get you the camera here too.
Yeah, I was thinking what you said earlier, Jim, is that the top down and the bottom up approach, and that actually looks at how you can interrupt that and give yourself some free will. And because it looked at different therapeutic approaches where you could, take a top down and the frontal lobes say, oh, that smoke is really just the steak burning in the pan a little bit. We don't need to overreact. And that section starts, oh, let's start the breathing. Let's take long, slow breaths and interrupt that whole sequence. And then the other kind of therapies that come in from the bottom up, like with the breathing is one that you can have both conscious and unconscious control of. But he listed some therapies where you could intervene, especially with someone who's frozen, with the sensory aspects of it. And I think that is sort of a counter argument to the free will, where you have the ability to interject in this process. And I saw another video earlier this week where it talked about how the stuff got wires together, and a guy used an example of learning to ride a bike. As when you first start riding that bike, everything you have to focus on is so hard. And, getting the pedals, getting the balance just right, but you practice it over and over again until it becomes like an automated response. And you can ride your bike without any conscious thought. It's totally subconscious. And the brain has created structures to manage it. And as you've practiced it, you might even myelinate the neurons so that they're even faster and more automatic. But he was saying one of the problems that happens is when you experience that trauma, particularly as a child or, some while ago, and all of that stuff, and especially with riding a bike, it's kind of complex, but a series of steps or a series of things you go through. And it's when you start to ride the bike, it's hard to not just go straight forward and start pumping those pedals. It's sort of like an automatic thing. And when you've got the trauma response, the same sort of thing happens when it gets triggered. The response happens. It's very hard to get in there and make a conscious intervention. And that's what therapies are about. And mindfulness and yoga and whatnot are about, is giving you the ability to intervene in that kind of situation. I don't know, does that make sense? And the reason that it hit me so hard is I experienced a lot of those same childhood experiences you were talking about, Scott. And I had a current situation in a relationship where I was being treated in much the same way. And for several weeks now, I found myself just frozen. When it comes up, I can't think straight. I can't deal with it. And I've been working it through, and now my response each time is a little less on the physiological side and a little less on brain freeze, and I start thinking logically that, okay, this reaction comes from back there. And now I'm reaching a point where I'm ready to go talk to that person and actually, deal with the situation. And I was really judging myself and condemning myself for freezing, for not being able to handle it. And now I've got an idea. Well, I was getting on that bike, and now I'm being able to stop and turn the bike or slow it down or put the brakes on. So by working with the reaction in a non-judgmental way, I've been able to work myself through it. Not as fast as I like, but I can see where the learning has happened. And next time, maybe I'll be able to intervene more quickly. At any rate, that's one of the things I wanted to share, except that as a side note, you're talking about the Chihuahua at the door. I was having my 120-pound Great Pyrenees start up with that barking. So sorry, it slipped through the mic just a little bit. But at any rate, I'll get off my soapbox now.
No
and
worries.
Mirror neurons. I'll stop now, but I'd like to bring up mirror neurons at a different point.
Oh, for sure. On that one, I kind of checked myself because I think he goes into it much deeper in a later chapter, and he brought it up in this chapter. I think almost as like it's coming. He didn't really dive into it very deeply, and by all means, I love hearing people's pets, and sometimes kids will come up and ask a question too. It's fun because it snaps us into a different moment. So like, throw your mic on if your dog's barking. I'm totally like the opposite. I love hearing those.
What I find is I'm intervening for her in her reaction. So I'm telling her we're safe, we're okay, good girl for reacting to whatever it was you were sensing in the environment. But good girl, thank you. But it's okay. We can calm down now. And when I did that, she stopped barking.
Oh, that wonderful symbiosis of our pet relationships. They calm us down, we calm them down.
Yeah, exactly.
That's lovely. And sorry we kept the event just a little bit over for your comment, Haya, but I see your hand up on the board. I want to make sure we get your input. And let me throw the camera your way too.
Yeah, mine is just really brief, and it's just that something that came up as I was really with this process you're describing is that I was taught by a mentor of mine a long time ago that all trauma can be summarized into an over response or an under response to pressure. And that's been a really helpful way for me to start to think about the micro traumas that we don't like resolve or heal through, but they just don't. There's all those times where we're like, oh, this isn't the right time to feel this, and then they don't ever get felt, and so then it can make me hypo or hyper reactive the next time something triggers that memory. And so I've used that wisdom to really just keep checking myself of like, was this person's reaction to me an over or an under response to what was really being shared? Was my reaction to them an under or over response to what was really being shared? And what do I do with that information once I have it is the next question. But it's softened, it kept it from being like black or white trauma and more just starting to understand like we pattern off of stressful experiences, and if we don't consciously choose how we want to grow that pattern, we can turn into an automatic reaction, which then heightens every time.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that because it's, one of the things that we need is for, wise people to put these enormous, like, foundational scientific studies into chunks we can actually, like, put into practice. So that's a really important way to look at it, like either an over or an under reaction to a situation. That's a great way to qualify to pressure. That's a great way to qualify.
Yeah, it becomes something constant self-measurement of like, am I over responding or under responding here? Often it's
I'm taking that in.
Yeah, for me.
Yeah, over is probably the funner of the two, right?
Yeah, under responding is really uncomfortable to notice because from the outside, under responding can look like you're not tracking what's happening, you're being conflict avoidant, you're not like responding in a speed that tells me you know what's going on. So like that Under responding is the absence of a response, right? So it's much harder to catch.
Yeah.
Interesting. And I love the word that you said too, like a micro trauma. I'm thinking of some examples of that. But did you have like an example of something that hits that level of like a micro?
Well, I mean, I again think about this all in a gradient. So I talk a lot in what I teach. Instead of going with fawn, I talk about fix. That this is a reaction inside of us out of a place of fear that can actually escalate conflict. So fight, flight, freeze, fix, and in that frame of conflict resiliency that I teach on, there's this concept of like paper cuts and friction, and like how one so if we take somebody who is not from the country that they're in, and let's say they're an Uber driver, and one person saying, "Oh, you have an accent, where are you from?" is is fine. Maybe it's a great way to connect. But when they hear that 20 times in a day, every day, it becomes a type of microaggression that is cumulatively telling them over and over, you do not belong here. And many times when people ask that, they're not asking that thinking, will this be a healthy part of our conversation? Is this what's best for both of us to ask this question, versus I'm just making small talk and not really thinking about how I'm going to be received. So I think of micro traumas like microaggressions. Like, we don't know we're doing them many times, but it doesn't mean it's not doing harm. And that can be, in that case with the Uber driver, it could be that I'm just filling up the space because I don't know how to be around this person that I'm identifying might not be like me, or would be wanting to have a quiet car ride or whatever. And so I'm overreacting in a small way that cumulatively could be harmful to them. And so it's just that piece, I think, to reference a little of what you were saying, Jim, about being conscious of how we show up and recognizing that what might feel fine to me is not necessarily going to be fine to somebody else. And can I be in that dance with them and hear what they're saying and try to adjust to that? It's the lack of adjustment that is verifying that I'm in a freeze response. How do I find my flow?
Instead of using mirror neurons to catch their reaction.
Yeah, that's it. I've shut down, right? And so then I'm under responding or over responding because I'm not in that full brain, full body tracking place of staying curious and staying with the connection right now. I'm in some kind of fixation to the past or to the future, and that is a spin that is not present.
Yeah, great explanation. I was picturing to myself of like our little daily battery, right? And if you're a Uber driver and you're getting the same kind of like othering question, 16 times a day, every time it gets asked, your battery probably just takes a little dip, and
then
I loved bringing oh, go ahead. Yeah.
Well, I was just going to say it gets complicated because then I used to enjoy telling people where I'm from, but now I'm so sensitive to being asked that I don't feel excitement or pride when I share that. I feel flat and kind of dry about it, and that's telling you a message that I might not mean to convey about how I feel about the country where I'm from. And so then we get into all kinds of misunderstandings there, where maybe I, as a passenger, am going to hear this flat, dry response and be like, "Oh, you're a victim of that country," and so I'm gonna empathize with you here when you might not feel that way at all. And so there's a way that it's like not tracking how people are responding or really holding that consciousness of both sides can just lead to all kinds of microaggression.
Yeah, absolutely. And I loved how Jimmy, your comment came back into this too about like, practicing the frames of mind for like I can totally I have the luxury of knowing Jimmy for many years now and his personality, and I bet Jimmy's like the one Uber driver that would just love to get the same question because he'd just be like, I'm so happy you asked that, even if it's like the question you get every day, like where'd you get that hat or something. Jimmy would be like, I would love to tell you the story of my hat.
Pets.
Nice. Well, but I think that's an interesting piece, right? Because when you say, where did you get that hat? The metaphor of that is the hat can be taken off if they don't want that question anymore. But the accent cannot be taken off. So it's that piece about like, how am I responding to something that is curious or other to me in a way that doesn't add one more brick to a wall that's being built by a lot of people that are just not feeling what's the most bridging conversation to have here.
Yeah, absolutely. That kind of conscious awareness of choosing your communication points on things that aren't going to lead you into an area that's going to cause harm, when it's not necessary, right? Like you said, you described it as small talk. I'm just going to make small talk with an Uber driver. But if I ask them a question that they get not only many times a day, but also makes them feel othered, like it is a next level awareness that you're bringing that, to somebody else's experience. So yeah, super good example.
I like the example of a military brat who's asked, where are you from?
Right. Yeah. It doesn't have to be there from a foreign place. It's just the sense of people are not considering what this feels like. Or, I've heard a lot of people who experience bereavement and people say, I'm sorry for your loss, because that's what we're supposed to say. But for some people, that is really irritating and this exhaustive like pathway, especially people who have lost people very young in their life. I've heard them talk about like how they realize for the rest of their life when somebody says, oh, where's your dad or whatever, they have to say, oh, my dad died. Oh, I'm sorry for your loss. Like that over time starts to just feel like I don't want to share the truth about my life with anybody, because I'm still going to get that little bump that is not really about what do you know that I need to hear right now, as opposed to what you think I should hear or what you think you're supposed to say.
Or it triggers the loss trauma
exactly
experience.
Right? Like I could say my dad died and you're like, I'm sorry for your loss, and I'm like, it wasn't a loss, but now that you're putting it that way, now I'm feeling lost. It's really just, how do we stay curious in those moments where we think we know how we're supposed to behave, and it could create bruising, even if it's not full skin violation or metaphorical violation, it still can bruise bit by bit.
Yeah. Kind of unintentionally placing an expectation on a person by like naming their feeling for it when you don't even know how they feel about it.
Yeah.
And another one for me is like, when you share that you've lost someone or a pet, is oh, you'll see them again. that can really conflict with people's beliefs.
Yeah, that's it.
Some people don't believe that you're going to a place where you're going to see each other again. So that can be, you kind of can socially bat it off, right? But your body feels the question. That's I think what the book really brings into the discussion is, maybe a harmless social, I'm just going to let that question fly over my head, but it nails your nervous system in the target.
Yes.
That's
exactly.
why I like the concept, the metaphor of microaggressions being like mosquitoes, because there's that initial sting and itch, but you really feel. I grew up in southern states where I've had mosquitoes, and the place that I really felt the mosquitoes was at night when I was trying to fall asleep. The cumulative mosquito bites would then start to sink in as I was trying to like get in touch with my body and go to sleep. And there was that sense of like, oh my God, I have all these swollen, chunky places on my body that are definitely going to get more itchy. And
Mm.
microaggressions are like that. They're these cumulative paper cuts
Mhm.
that just are a little bit infected. And then people have to feel those when they are getting quiet with themselves. You know, the body's keeping that score for them. And so, um, yeah, I think about your three layers of brain, and I like how that was lined up because I think that the the piece that I'm doing in the world and that Bridgemakers to some degree is based off of is this concept of for leaders are to some degree, if you had to pick one of these three areas, they're in the cerebral cortex end of things. They're managing, they're
Mm.
languaging, they're in their kind of macro level, whatever. And then they're polarizing with all these people that are in their lizard brains. Quite literally, there's a community member that literally embodies a reptilian figure and has all this conflict in many different communities. And like what happens is then the leaders are just like, oh, not that person, not that person. Like they're the wrong person for my community. Instead of realizing that we're polarizing, we're manifesting these extremes off of each other. And so, bridge makers and so much of what I do in conflict resiliency teaching is about getting in touch with our mammalian brain and feeling the emotions and learning how to rewire and track our emotions with our body, because then we're not having to keep the score to process later on. We're recognizing the score in every moment and advocating for maybe those higher level plans and functions and visions, but we're also advocating from our human and realizing like my human self has limits. And especially in a landscape that is so privileged, such as social VR, it feels like leaders that are not tracking or growing connection back into their bodies, it's a short road with a lot of burnout.
Mm. Good point.
Yeah. And I loved the description of the mosquitoes too, like this kind of concept of like death by a thousand cuts, where
Yep.
I think this can be a really difficult trauma to be self validating. Is, you know, you can't really point to many things in your life that happened where somebody would be like, "Oh my God, I can't believe like that happened to you." You know, you tell somebody one or two things and they're like, "Oh, you know, maybe just get over that." But it's like it happened all the time. You know, that's like
Yeah.
the difficulty of it is, you know, in this chapter they talk about your brain being, you know, use based. So if that was your experience just year after year after year, like your brain wired into that experience. So, you know, trauma doesn't have to be like, I got mugged in an alley. You know, it
Yeah.
can just be like,
Yeah.
I fell down every day and my parents never like came to pick me up.
Yeah.
You know, like that.
Yeah.
That's something that you remember and develops into you.
Yeah. And then,
Yeah,
I
the
mean, on one
mosquito
end,
bites.
it can be felt like, oh no, we're minimizing, you know, that threshold of trauma that turns into PTSD and the real horrific loss that people can go through. And I hope that we can hold both frames at the same time. There's a
Right.
gradient of violation, and then there are violations that completely and fundamentally and quickly reshape our lives for the rest of our lives. And that both of those things can combine to end up making us even more resilient, but also more fracturable. Um, and so, how do we bridge between that lizard brain that, to some degree, in this medium is kind of being hacked a little bit with the stimulus of gaming and the kind of instant reward system that a lot of these social media spaces are based off of? Like, You dream it, you can find it. You wish it, it'll come true. And so then we're not necessarily growing that deeper, longer term process around how do I recognize my uncomfortable emotions and go, oh, okay, there's an opportunity here. Is this the container? What is the container that I need to be in my discomfort and grow through it instead of just exiting?
Hmm.
Yeah, I'm seeing more and more articles in the psychology world about like the dangers of fantasy and like fantasy addiction
Mm-hmm.
as like an escapist coping mechanism. So yeah, that fits right in with what you just mentioned there about gaming and avoiding the body's processing of something uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Yeah, very profound. And you know what? Let me just check in on our YouTube comments too and see if we got any closing remarks here. Let's see. Oh, Fuzz, the seeds we water take root. Yeah, very, very much in line with what we were talking about, right? Is like your I forget the way that they put it now. Like what fires together wires together in the brain. That was what they said.
Mm-hmm.
Reliving trauma by getting wrapped up in our emotional state just creates a weed in our mind that grows deep into the subconscious. Oh man, yeah, poetic way of saying it too. And I think KT, you had a term that I hadn't heard before. Was it myelinate, where you kind of you accelerate your program with the neurons that are together, so it's just more of a muscle memory than a real thought process. So that's kind of the science behind it, right? What fires together wires together, and then you just got an automated response. That can be hard to practice out of.
Yeah.
But if we had a nice little pooch to bump our thigh every once in a while and snap us out of it, that's a nice luxury. But let's see, are we wrapping up on commentary for chapter 4? Any other little nuggets that are coming back up? If not, we can go ahead and officially close the event down there, and we'll be back at the same time next week for chapter 5. Let's see where this goes. So bye for now.
Thank you, Scott.
Appreciate you.